This video lesson is on the presidency. What are the president's many roles? The president is chief of state. This means he is the ceremonial head of the government of the United States, the symbol of all the people of the nation. The Constitution vests the president with the executive power of the United States, making him or her the nation's chief executive. The president is the chief administrator or director of the United States government. As the nation's chief diplomat, the president is the main architect of American foreign policy and chief spokesperson to the rest of the world. The Constitution makes the president the commander-in-chief, giving him or her complete control of the nation's armed forces. The president is the chief legislator, the main architect of the nation's public policies. The president acts as the chief of party, the acknowledged leader of the political party that controls the executive branch. The president is the chief citizen and is expected to be the representative of all the people. What are the formal qualifications necessary to become president? Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5 of the Constitution says that the president must be at least 35 years old, a natural-born citizen, and lived in the U.S. at least 14 years. And informal qualifications such as intelligence and character are also important considerations. What issues have arisen involving the length of the president's term? Until 1951, the Constitution placed no limit on the number of terms a president might serve. Traditionally, presidents limited the number of terms served to two. This tradition was broken by Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1940 when he ran for and won a third term in office. He then went on to be elected to a fourth term in 1944. The 22nd Amendment placed limits on presidential terms. Presidents now may not be elected more than twice, or only once if they became president due to succession. How is the president compensated? The president's pay was first set at $25,000 a year. Currently, the president is paid $400,000 a year. Congress has also approved an expense allowance for the president, which is currently $50,000 a year. Besides monetary benefits, the president gets to live in the 132-room mansion that we call the White House. The president is also granted other benefits, including a large suite of offices, a staff, the use of Air Force One, and many other fringe benefits. How does the Constitution provide for presidential succession? Presidential succession is the plan by which a presidential vacancy is filled. The 25th Amendment, ratified in 1967, made it clear that the vice president will become president if the president is removed from office. The Presidential Succession Act of 1947 set the order of succession following the vice president. What are the constitutional provisions for presidential disability? Sections 3 and 4 of the 25th Amendment provides procedures to follow when the president is disabled. The vice president is to become acting president if the president informs Congress in writing that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office, or the vice president and a majority of the members of the cabinet inform Congress in writing that the president is thus incapacitated. What is the role of the vice president? The Constitution gives the Vice President only two duties besides becoming President if the President is removed from office: to preside over the Senate and to help decide the question of presidential disability. If the office of Vice President becomes vacant, the President nominates a new Vice President subject to the approval of Congress. Today, the Vice President often performs diplomatic and political chores for the President. A total of 9 Vice Presidents succeeded to the presidency: John Tyler, Millard Fillmore, Andrew Johnson, Chester A. Arthur, Theodore Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, Harry S. Truman, Lyndon B. Johnson, and Gerald R. Ford. What were the framers' original provisions for choosing the president? According to the Constitution, the president and vice president are chosen by a special body of presidential electors. The framers planned for the Electoral College. First, each state would have as many presidential electors as it has senators and representatives in Congress. These electors would be chosen in each state in a manner the state legislature directed. The electors, meeting in their own states, would each cast 2 votes for a different person for president. These electoral votes from the states would be opened and counted before a joint session of Congress. The person receiving the largest number of electoral votes, provided that total was a majority of all the electors, would become president. The person with the second highest number of electoral votes would become vice president. If a tie occurred, or if no one received the votes of a majority of the electors, the president would be chosen by the House of Representatives, voting by states. If a tie occurred for the second spot, the vice president would be chosen by the Senate. How did the rise of political parties change the original provisions set out in the Constitution? The Electoral College is the group of people, electors, chosen from each state and the District of Columbia that formally selects the president and vice president. With the rise of political parties in 1796, flaws began to be seen in the system. The 12th Amendment was added to the Constitution in 1804, following the election of 1800. The major change in the Electoral College made by the amendment was that each elector would distinctly cast 1 electoral vote for president and 1 for vice president. What role do conventions play in the presidential nominating process? The convention system has been mainly built by the 2 major parties in American politics. Party national committees arrange the time and place for their party's nominating convention. Parties apportion the number of delegates each state will receive based on electoral votes and other factors. Delegates are selected through both presidential primaries and the caucus-convention process. How important are presidential primaries? Depending on the state, a presidential primary is an election in which a party's voters choose some or all of a state's party organization's delegates to their party's national convention and or express a preference among various contenders for their party's presidential nomination. Many states use a proportional representation rule to select delegates. In this system, a proportion of a state's delegates are chosen to match voter preferences in the primary. More than half of the states hold preference primaries, where voters choose their preference for a candidate. Delegates are selected later to match voter preferences. What differences exist between the caucus-convention process and the primary process? In those states that do not hold presidential primaries, Delegates to the national conventions are chosen in a system of caucuses and conventions. The party's voters meet in local caucuses, where they choose delegates to a local or district convention, where delegates to the state convention are picked. At the state level, and sometimes in the district conventions, delegates to the national convention are chosen. What events take place during a national convention? A party's national convention is the meeting at which delegates vote to pick their presidential and vice presidential candidates. Party conventions accomplish three main goals: to officially name the party's presidential and vice presidential candidates, to bring the various factions and the leading personalities in the party together in one place for a common purpose, and to adopt the party's platform, its formal statement of basic principles, stands on major policy matters, and objectives for the campaign and beyond. What characteristics determine who is nominated as a presidential candidate? If an incumbent president wants to seek re-election, his or her nomination is almost guaranteed. Political experience factors into the nomination process. State governors, the executive officers on the state level, have historically been favored for nomination. Vice presidents and U.S. senators also have fared well. Many candidates come from key, larger states. Candidates from larger states such as California, Texas, and New York have usually seen as more electable than candidates from smaller states. What is the function of the Electoral College today? Voters do not vote directly for the president. Instead, they vote for electors in the Electoral College. All states, except two, Maine and Nebraska, select electors based on the winner of the popular vote in that state. Electors then meet in the state capitals on the Monday after the second Wednesday in December and cast their votes for president and vice president. On January 6th, the electoral votes cast are counted by the President of the Senate, and the President and Vice President are formally elected. The President is inaugurated on January 20th. If no candidate wins a majority of electoral votes, which is 270, the election is thrown into the House of Representatives. What are the flaws in the Electoral College? There are three major defects in the Electoral College. First, it is possible to win the popular vote in the presidential election, but lose the Electoral College vote. This has happened 4 times in U.S. history, in 1824, 1876, 1888, and in 2000. Nothing in the Constitution nor in any federal statute requires the electors to vote for the candidate favored by the popular vote in their state. If no candidate gains a majority in the Electoral College, the election is thrown into the House, a situation that has happened twice, in 1800 and 1824. In this process, each state is given one vote, meaning that states with smaller populations wield the same power as those with larger populations. What are the advantages and disadvantages of proposed reforms in the Electoral College? In the district plan, electors would be chosen the same way members of Congress are selected. Each congressional district would select one elector, just as they select representatives, and 2 electors would be selected based on the overall popular vote in a state, just as senators are elected. Their proportional plan suggests that each candidate would receive the same share of a state's electoral vote as he or she received in the state's popular vote. A commonly heard reform suggests that the Electoral College be done away with altogether in favor of direct popular elections. At the polls, voters would vote directly for the president and vice president instead of electors. The national bonus plan would automatically offer the winner of the popular vote 102 electoral votes, in addition to the other electoral votes he or she might gain. Should the Electoral College be replaced by direct popular election of the president? Yes. Why? Can distort popular choice, fosters two-party system, and shuts out third-party candidates, can make voters feel that their votes don't count if their elector supports the losing candidates, can encourage faithless electors or those who decline to support the candidates to whom they were pledged, may lead to the House of Representatives deciding the election for states with one electoral vote, is outdated because literacy is now widespread and people can easily obtain information about candidates, and can give undue power to the swing states. Should the Electoral College be replaced by direct popular election of the president? No. Gives immediate election results and with certainty no national recounts. Is inexpensive and time efficient. Does not lead to runoffs. Discourages third-party candidates. Is democratic, keeping the selection process in the hands of the voters. Provides chosen candidates with the majority of votes. Encourages concurrent majorities, an important constitutional principle in which groups from different parts of the country with different political ideas come together in an assembly of consent and keep states, large and small, important to the presidential selection process.